Another nice benefit to this is that your body, with that kind of intensity, the corticotropin releasing factor directly stimulates your hypothalamus to suppress hunger. So you get appetite suppression. If you work out hard enough, you're typically not just not hungry, you don't even feel like eating for a couple of hours. That's pretty helpful. All right. We are going to talk about something that there are a couple versions of already in our database. So I'm going to mention those coming up. But when I looked at this, I thought this was an incredibly good meta-analysis, not even a meta-analysis, more of a literature review that gives you a great bird's eye view of all of the factors, the physiology, in what truly uses the best form of cardio for fat loss. So those of you who have been in and out of our research reviews, you're probably going to recognize a couple of these studies cited by this literature review, or some of the facts that are pulled out. This is a specific. Let me pull that up. Position paper in the Journal of Obesity. It's a little more than 10 years old, and I imagine there are a few confirming studies that have been out there. I know since this time, actually beginning in about 2013, 2014, 15, somewhere in there is when people like Brad Schoenfeld, Eric Helms, started looking at some of these things. The ISSN and, a couple of the past presidents of that International Society of Sports Nutrition have really been active. Of course, the NSA or NSCA and their journal, Human Kinetics, their publishing arm. There's just been almost a cumulative exponential growth in this kind of research. Obviously, a lot of sport performance stuff too, but in the last decade. This, however, did cite about 64 studies looking at something incredibly specific, which is just high intensity interval type training. So let me get into they divided it into three main sections. I'm going to kind of lump two together. So there's the acute and chronic response. What's really happening physiologically when people do high intensity cardio versus just moderate or low. And then, getting down to the real, stuff, what is the data pointing to? What are we looking at in terms of a real fat loss advantage? So first of all, in research, when you're doing a position paper, a literature review, you always want to have qualifications for the types of studies you're interpreting. You'll often hear me on a day like this say, they looked at 842 studies and 64 of them qualified for this, or maybe they even, interviewed that many subjects and a much smaller number ended up being in the study group. So 64 or so studies, and they wanted to make sure they were looking at high intensity intervals. So as just a form of definition, they said they included anything that looked at 6-second intervals all the way up to 4-minute intervals. 4 minutes, pretty tough. That's definitely more glycolytic energy system than what I would call an anaerobic interval. But the vast majority of their information did come from either Wingate's or that 8-second, 12-second split that I've talked about so many times. So a Wingate is where you do 30 seconds as hard as you possibly can against high resistance. So this became most popular using like a spin bike. So you could really just crank up the resistance so high that by the time you got that flywheel moving and you had gone as hard as you possibly can, you couldn't sustain it for more than 30 seconds. I think you can do the same thing on an elliptical or an arc trainer, where again, you can have a lot of resistance against a lot of muscle tissue, but it's very tough to count regular sprinting. I'm not going to say it's off the table, but regular sprinting is heavy resistance. It's heavy resistance for your hamstrings. It's heavy. It's hard for your lungs. I mean, you could do, a 30-second all-out sprint. You're barely getting, a half a lap on a track in. Maybe if you're world class, you can get a 400-meter sprint around the track once. But again, that's very much lower body dominance. So most of the time they're looking at something with heavy muscular resistance like that bike. So keep that in mind. One of the things I had mentioned a couple minutes ago that you're going to, if you're really interested in this topic and you go to our Diet Doc YouTube channel or our website, thedietdoc.com, you'll see a playlist for the research review specifically. There's one called The Science of Cardio, I believe, that goes over this. There's one called The Science of, I've got these written down in a slide or two, of diet versus exercise. There's one called The Science of Hormones. And a lot of this stuff comes up over and over. But these types of interval trainings are usually up to about 20 minutes. You're not going to typically do more than that. And that's going to become very important when we talk about how to manage these, how to program them, how to recover, and so forth. So one of the things that we're going to look at in this physiological acute response is heart rate. That's kind of easy. Obviously, your heart rate goes much, much higher when you're doing high intensity training. There is a massive hormonal difference in response. There are blood glucose differences, both acute and chronic. Lactic acid or delayed onset muscle soreness. There is a little plot twist on that I'm happy to show you guys. There's the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic versus sympathetic, and what happens both acutely and chronically, because that becomes important for recovery. Then there's metabolic activity, meaning what's actually happening to the cells of your body, things like mitochondria and so forth. And remember, fat loss is a totally separate response. We're just looking at what's actually happening when we do high intensity training. Now, I do want to mention again, though, because a lot of people are used to doing sprints just on a treadmill or a track as part of what they would call high intensity. I don't think that's bad at all, but you're going to run into a top level pretty quickly where you almost feel like, okay, I'm really conditioned to do this. And now I'm almost risking more orthopedic danger than I am just progressing. So, for example, somebody who's really well conditioned at running, I can put them on a treadmill and do 30-second sprints or 10-second sprints, that kind of thing. And, you get a certain response. Their heart rate will go up to a certain level, will stay for a certain level and come back down. So that's kind of a measurement of their conditioning. Well, if I load up a prowler with 400 pounds and I have them push that as hard as they can for the same length of time, I guarantee I can double or triple that response. Because now they're not just running with the same body weight with momentum. Now they're using their whole body, upper and lower, to push something. So now we're back into maximum resistance. So something to consider. Cardiovascular response has a lot to do with how much muscle tissue in your whole body is working at the same time. That's why functional training is so tough. That's why a burpee is kind of that gold standard. You're using upper and lower body to maximum levels. But most studies show in normal high intensity bouts, which, I would even consider the Wingate on a cycle almost like sprinting, where you're only using your legs. That's still good, but I think there are better ways. Most people who do this type of training in these studies they reviewed end up after about 5 minutes, so a couple cycles, their heart rate's about 150. And then when they get up to kind of their maximum threshold, they start averaging about 175. Again, very, very conditioning dependent. I talked a couple sessions ago about my normal cardio regimen and how, if I'm on a treadmill, I can only get my heart rate up so high. Then if I go to a bike, I get it up so high. And then I have to be on an arc trainer with the resistance level at like 75 before I can even get my heart rate above 180. And, somebody who's not very conditioned, they could probably get to 180 just walking across the room. It really has to be something that you look at for safety. Orthopedic stress, like I said, tearing a hamstring or just joint inflammation in your knees, your hips, and so forth. And this all out concept, when you look at research, they use that a lot. It really does depend on what that means for you. And so I'm going to mention this a couple of times, but as somebody hopefully gets convinced that this is something worth trying, man, minimum effective dose is your phrase. Learn that phrase well. If I have a client, even just in normal weight training or functional training, if they have never done a particular movement or an exercise, I'm not going to say, hey, guess what I got for you? We're going to do 30 minutes, 16 sets of this new exercise you've never done before. We're going to incrementally build into that. And you're going to see in a couple places that these authors note responses after just one session or even one sprint of one session and what can happen metabolically to people in an advantageous way. So think about that. This is something that you should always start pretty low. But when we get into the hormone response, because hormones are the backbone of what we're going to talk about, you should remember, if you've been in and out of our sessions here, that the catecholamine hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, are the money load when it comes to fat loss. So I'm going to talk about that over the next couple slides here. But that also, as I mentioned, is in our Science of Hormones and Fat Loss session, the Science of Diet and Exercise for Fat Loss. Those are on our YouTube channel and our website. But one of the studies, so the one that showed that 8-second on, 12-second off, so 8 seconds on, 12 off, 8 on, 12 off, just like that, just repetitively for as long as you want, anywhere from a couple of sprints all the way to, they show that the law of diminishing returns kind of taps out at about 20 minutes. So if you're doing the highest intensity intervals you possibly can, and I mean, I don't even know if I could do 20 minutes like that. That's almost a concentration issue. Like, can you literally just focus for 8 seconds, 12, 8, 12, 8, 12, 8, 12, 8, 12, and keep up that pace for 20 minutes? I mean, just concentration wise, not even physically, I think that would be quite a challenge. So I think you're going to see that as most people have programmed things like Wingates, you see a lot of things like do 4, do 6, do 8. It's not even counted in minutes. It's just do this many sprints. And I think that's a really good way to program something if they are that long, something like 30 seconds or even a minute. If you're doing that 8-12 kind of split, I think it makes sense to maybe do them in a couple minutes intervals, catch your breath for a minute, then do a couple more minutes and so forth. I just really think orthopedically, when you have that constant amount of turnover in terms of what your muscle tissue is having to go through mechanically, as well as resynthesizing ATP and phosphocreatine, it's I think you just need those little breaks in there, at least to step away and regroup. But this is one thing that you guys will remember from another one of my presentations. Several studies, one in particular looking at that 8-12 split, showed up to 6-fold and 14-fold, 14.5-fold increases in epinephrine, norepinephrine. Now, those two are just different names for adrenaline. So there's adrenaline and noradrenaline, also called epinephrine, norepinephrine. So your adrenal glands secrete these. It's a 1-2 punch. Epinephrine is what stimulates your heart to beat faster. Norepinephrine is what stimulates your blood vessels to expand or contract. So it's your whole cardiovascular system preparing for activity. So those are obviously only secreted in amounts that you need for this kind of intense activity. So they become a good measuring stick for how much stress you're really putting your body under. And what's interesting is that only through high intensity exercise do these things go up much at all. Because even if you're doing what you would call moderate cardio, well, first of all, let's say low intensity. Let's say you're just following a coach who says, oh, you should just walk. And nobody needs to do anything but just walk. Just walk 60 minutes a day. That's what I do. Okay. Your heart rate goes up 30%. You get into a cadence of using a little bit more body fat as energy. Maybe the amount of calories you're using per hour goes from 60 or 70 to 120. So you burned an extra 100 or 200 calories, over that time, but you're literally doing nothing for this kind of hormonally induced fat loss. Look at those numbers, 600 and 1,400% increases for up to an hour of these hormones. That's real energy use happening. Growth hormone increases up to an hour later at 1,000% as far as an increase. Testosterone, very similarly, I think testosterone increases up to 600%. I mean, those are massive changes. That's because of growth hormone and testosterone increase. That's one of the reasons why higher intensity cardio actually preserves lean body mass instead of the opposite, as many people errantly think. So again, looking at these hormones, looking at these adrenal hormones, the bottom line is the baseline. That's just you kind of doing nothing. And then you see in the epinephrine and the norepinephrine, so you see that 630% and that 1,430%. So just seeing that graphically, that's what's going up into your training, and then it stays there for about an hour. Then you have that slow coming back down phase where you're still using that much more energy. So when we measure things like post-exercise oxygen consumption, everybody likes to talk about that in research and metabolic cart testing. Again, that's real energy. It's not just the amount of time and the acute effects happening right now. It's what you get for hours after that cumulatively adds up over a lot of time. I mean, consider you dieting for 4 months, 6 months, or a year, and what this can mean, which I'm going to show you what that means here in a couple of slides. As soon as we get to fat loss, I think you're going to be convinced this is something worth at least trying. So other hormones involved. So first of all, in that Science of Hormones lecture I did that's in the bank for you guys, I talk about some studies that described why these catecholamine hormones are the only relevant ones to body fat loss. Thyroid hormone is a distant second place contender. That's obviously a factor, but it still pales in comparison to these adrenal hormones. Things, what am I trying to say? Just testosterone, estrogen, those androgen hormones, they have very little to do with fat loss. If anything, they even impede fat loss. And so a lot of people, again, errantly think that they play a bigger role, but it's all about epinephrine and norepinephrine. But some of the things that happen that some people point to and say, that's bad. This is why high intensity cardio is bad. It increases cortisol. It increases lactic acid. Lactic acid's bad. Lactic acid makes you sore and then you can't do things. Guess what? The longer you do low intensity cardio, the more lactic acid you get. So you can actually get twice as much lactic acid from a bout of exercise. Like, let's say you walk for 40 minutes, you can get more sore than had you ran for 10 minutes or done interval training. And again, measured, very biochemically, very objectively. Cortisol, yes, cortisol increases as it does with anything, even just mental stress. But because high intensity training is a shorter bout, once again, the cortisol per unit of time is no higher in most people. Depends on your conditioning level and how hard you're doing intervals. But at the same time, cortisol is what drives adaptation. And I've heard some other coaches who are in the know, people with exercise science backgrounds will say, yeah, everybody kind of poo-poos on cortisol. But if you don't release cortisol, it didn't mean you worked hard at all. Like, it takes you actually working hard, even in weight training, to release cortisol. And cortisol then is what creates the entire cascade of anabolic response. So the higher your cortisol, that's actually a good thing, because then you have a higher adaptive response. What you don't want is cortisol chronically high. Acutely high, that's your friend. Chronically high, because you're overtraining, undersleeping, things like that, now you're in a bad position. So let's go over to some of the neurological responses. There's absolutely parasympathetic impairment. I mean, when you rev up your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response, because again, these are adrenal hormones, epinephrine, norepinephrine. So you are amped up, your heart rate's super high. Up to an hour, they say that your parasympathetic nervous system is impaired enough that it's probably not a good idea to do sprints at 9 o'clock at night if you're going to try to go to bed at 10. You're probably going to be still pretty amped up, and your body is kind of high, so to speak, on adrenaline. Like, you're going to have a lot of energy. I don't know if you guys do this, but I've mentioned that one of the reasons I love to train in the middle of the day, like I usually train around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, is because by that point, I've been at work for 8 hours, you know, getting kind of bored of just, quote, working. And I can get that tremendous workout in, and then I feel great for the whole rest of the day. If I didn't do that, if I just maybe trained in the morning, I'm just feeling pretty lousy by mid to late afternoon. Like I'm tired, I'm ready to go to bed. So I get that nice little surge of sympathetic nervous system energy. And that's, neither here nor there. You guys have to train when you have to train. But I would say make sure that you understand doing these kind of things late at night could have a response. Let's talk about some of the things that comes to your actual biochemistry. So just how this works. Let's say you start your first sprints, and this is truly where you need to understand why you're doing this. If you're doing a sprint at all, something where you're giving it all out intensity for 6 seconds or 8 seconds or 30 seconds, you're going to use ATP. That's your muscle fiber, every individual muscle cell's first line of energy use. You have about 8 to 12 seconds worth of maximum work there. Phosphocreatine, of course, where we get creatine, phosphate as a supplement, creatine monohydrate. That is what resynthesizes ATP. So you got this whole system of using ATP and recycling it. And you can only do that so many times before you can't catch up. So ATP is being used, creatine is recycling it, and pretty soon you're in debt, so to speak, and you have to start using then glycogen. So now you're moving through a different energy system. You're going, through the Krebs cycle, so forth, into, different ways your body uses energy. The next is using blood sugar, or I should say muscle glycogen right there available to the cell. And you've got 2 to 3 minutes worth of that. You guys have heard me talk about this in sport metaphors. So if I'm doing a 100-meter sprint and I'm going all out for 8 to 10 seconds, nobody can keep up that pace any farther. If you look at a 100-meter sprint compared to a 200, compared to a 400, compared to an 800, you see there's a throttling back of those speeds because you cannot maintain that. So that's using up all of your ATP. Then when you get into those 30-second, 60-second, 2-minute type bouts, like a wrestling match round or a boxing round, now you're using all the glycogen you can, and you eventually reach a point where you just can't turn that over fast enough, because once you're out of that muscle glycogen, to synthesize more means you're now converting body fat into glucose, a much, much longer process that you just can't do instantaneously. So to make up for that gap, your body starts using oxygen as energy, and that's full aerobic energy. When you do high intensity interval training, of course, the goal is to use ATP to maximize that. That's why it's an all out bout. But then you do that repetitively so that you're getting through the glycogen energy system and you're depleting that wholly. So that's somebody who might be able to do these kind of sprints for 2 or 3 minutes, or if you're doing rests like a Wingate where it's 30 seconds on, 4 minutes off, 30 seconds on, 4 minutes off, you get more recovery, but you're also getting more depletion because it's 30 seconds instead of 8. Eventually, when you get so conditioned that no longer bothers you, like I can do that and I still feel like I have more energy in the tank, you've simply moved your VO2 max up, and your ability to dispose of glucose fast enough, and even partially fat adaptive, you're using fat as an energy substrate even faster, that now you have to get into oxygen debt to really progress forward in any level of conditioning. So that's why some of these, as they said, can go up to 10, 15, or 20 minutes. That would be considered a maximum high intensity interval session, because now you're maxing out the ATP anaerobic system, glycolytic system, and you're moving enough into oxygen debt where you're getting a conditioning response. You can do that for too long. Like you don't want to do that for hours at a time. That then becomes orthopedically and even biochemically suppressive. But again, that's what you're doing metabolically. And once you get into this at a conditioned level, I talked about that post-exercise oxygen consumption. A lot of reliable studies have affirmed that about 6 to 15% increase in just your acute metabolism for a couple of hours. So that's how much bump you get that you wouldn't get normally from a low intensity type state. But there actually is not that much direct comparison of, how far you can take this. Is there a law of diminishing returns that really becomes problematic? So there are some areas that I think, people could take this a little bit further, and maybe they will. Right now, I feel like we're in a phase where high intensity interval training is not that exciting. Maybe 15 or so years ago, it was the new kid on the block. And now there's definitely a turn toward people using it less and less. And from just a cultural perspective, you who have different coaches or you follow different people and they tell you it's not that big of a deal, they'll probably tell you it's because it's harder to recover from. And that's true. That's why you don't want to necessarily use it all the time or overuse it. But before we get into that, first, the chronic response. So this is what's happening in your body when you're doing this type of training. Research shows just tremendous aerobic and anaerobic benefit that you don't necessarily get from low intensity or moderate intensity, consistent, steady state work. Your fasting insulin and glucose levels are improved immediately. VO2 max. One study shows that, or actually I should say there's a lot of confirming studies, but these are kind of the up to level. So maximum levels we've seen research so far that your VO2 max can go up about 13% in just 2 weeks, 46%. That's a lot in 3 to 6 months. So that's real conditioning, which has a lot of cardiac risk mitigation emphasis or improvement. Biopsies show what I would expect them to show, that the mitochondria adapt and the energy production parts of your cells actually get better at producing energy. That's what being in higher conditioned states means. But look at this one. Insulin resistance improved up to 58% after just 2 weeks. And when they say after 2 weeks, usually their study comparison is doing 2 to 3 bouts of sessions per week for, maybe a maximum of 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes not even that long. And that's kind of their baseline to show stats like this, that as a comparative relationship, insulin resistance improved up to 58% after just 2 weeks. Those are some fascinating things that just don't happen with low intensity work. So now let's turn to fat loss, and then we'll wrap up. So from their data, they show that, as I just mentioned, 2 bouts 3 times a week, or 3 per week for 2 weeks, compared. So this is where they actually compare it to low intensity, showed that an extra 1,500 to 2,000 calories were burned. And then you can see that graphic there. And the interesting thing is that's in half the time. I don't consider that the biggest variable. I don't want people to say, well, gosh, if I only have to invest half the time and I can burn that many more calories, then I'm going to do it. You have to consider execution and recovery the bigger variables, because it is harder. For somebody to say, oh, I'll just do high intensity work because I get more bang for my buck. Yeah, wait till you try it. It's a lot easier just to walk on the treadmill than to do sprints. It's a lot easier to just jog lightly than to push a prowler with hundreds of pounds. So again, the benefits are there, but there's a reason why people are hesitant to get on board fully with it. And I do agree that there has to be some respect for the cost orthopedically. So another thing with fat loss that's very, very interesting is that abdominal fat loss, meaning not just your waistline, but in your trunk, like what's called your greater omentum and intra-organ fat, is greater with high intensity training. That's one of the reasons why it has such acute, rapid improvements for things like insulin. It's also why we measure trunk fat as a higher risk factor for heart disease and so forth. So another reason why high intensity work shows some of those health improvements so quickly. But here's another interesting thing. Guess what other areas of our body are more dominantly receptor site affinity? That's a very awkward phrasing for in terms of adrenal hormones, the lower body. So we know women who carry more of their body fat in their lower body, these beta agonist receptors that we just have more of them in the lower body, those are unlocked, so to speak, by the adrenal hormones, catecholamines, more than anything else. So, and this is not a massive thing. If you're a typical person who has a little bit more lower body fat, that's harder to get rid of because you're estrogen dominant, you're a female, 90+% of women fall in this category, and you think, oh, great, high intensity cardio is my thing. I'll just melt that hip body fat away. The gradation is pretty subtle, but I think it's there. And even in my career, when I talked in my post, just announcing this session today, that when I started doing high intensity work, and that was the leanest I ever got, my body fat distribution is very uniform. So if I'm clipping at 7 millimeters on my triceps and my abs and my ilium, so are my quads. I mean, you can look at that kind of body fat distribution over my entire career. And a lot of guys may clip at 15 millimeters in their abs, and then their quads are like 3 because guys store it there. Women, the opposite. You can clip a woman, her triceps may be 12 and her abs are 2. I just am very uniform. So just kind of an even dominance in terms of estrogen and testosterone receptors and so forth in my body. And so for me, as a male pro bodybuilder and glute striations being the gold standard, it was impossible to achieve for me until I started doing this kind of cardio, because just to diet and do more regular cardio to get down there, I would lose so much upper body size that by the time I got lean enough, I still wasn't as lean as most guys, but I'd lost so much muscle. So me doing more high intensity cardio really balanced that out. I retained muscle better. That's one of the benefits of high intensity work. And proportionately, I lost a little bit more body fat from my lower body because of this catecholamine response. So another nice benefit to this is that your body with that kind of intensity, and you probably have felt this if you've done high intensity work, the corticotropin releasing factor directly stimulates your hypothalamus to suppress hunger. So you get appetite suppression. If you work out hard enough, you're typically not just not hungry, you don't even feel like eating for a couple of hours. That's pretty helpful. I would even find in my hardest dieting that sometimes when I knew I was going to be hungry, like at this time of the day, I'm typically like, that's my spot where I'm struggling with hunger. If I turned that into a high intensity session, it not only got me through that, it actually made me not hungry. And so, a little hack there that may work for some people. So now this is where I think we all need to come to the table together as performance athletes, physique competitors, general population, people who are just trying to look their best, feel their best, and maintain good health. Come back to this being very condition dependent. You are prepared to do a certain level right now. You could today start this. It may be that you do your normal workout and you just pull out a jump rope and you do 50 jumps. There you go. Day one's in the bank. You just did high intensity interval training. You did one sprint and you're good to go. Now, 2 days from now, maybe you can do that twice. You could do that, jump rope for 30 seconds as hard as you can, set it aside for 30 seconds, do another 30 seconds. Now you've done 2 sprints. Maybe you do that on a recumbent bike because that's your level of conditioning where you don't even want that high impact. Anybody can start anywhere. Those who are advanced, I would still caution you because of the direct training result to not do it too much. I remember one time, I probably as a precursor to what I was talking about in my 2006 contest, maybe it was right around that time. But I remember getting into like stadium stair running. I'm like, somebody said, oh, this is going to be a good thing to do. Let's go do stadium stairs. So you make the investment of driving there to a school or something. So it's like, I'm not going to just do a couple. So I ran stadium stairs for maybe 20 minutes. And then of course I had shin splints for the next 6 months. So even if you're in really good shape, respect how hard it is on your body to do, this level of work, and bring yourself up very incrementally. I think it's important to be intuitive with recovery extensions, meaning that if you decide, okay, I'm going to do this once or twice a week, well, there may be one day you just know you shouldn't do it. Like, I did not get enough sleep. I'm not recovered. Maybe this is my day to squat really heavy, and there's no way I'm going to do a sprint without hurting myself. It's okay. Skip it for that week. There's always next time, or maybe you just need an extra day. But when you're doing this aggressive of work, you really do have to consider just laying off when you know you need to lay off. As I've said before, if it's a difference between doing cardio or getting 7 hours of sleep, get the sleep. The extra cardio is going to do you no good if you're so sleep deprived that systemic chronic cortisol levels are extremely high. I hope we actually, I think, have done the science of sleep. And if you're chronically sleep deprived, training is actually going to decrease your health, and you're not going to lose body fat. It's probably the easiest way to stop progress is just to not get enough sleep. So that just has to be, sleep hygiene just has to be there. You can't be one of these people who says, well, I just can't help it. I can't get enough sleep. You can get enough sleep. You just have to figure it out with your responsibilities. It can be done. I don't care if you have 16 kids and you work 4 jobs, you can get enough sleep. If you can't, then your health is just, you can't do these things anyway. It's just going to hurt you more than help you. As I mentioned before, weight training conflicts have to be factored in your scheduling. It's just a matter of maybe personal preference, but this may work for you. I found that the day after I did a heavy leg workout, so let's say I did like really aggressive squats, stiff-legged deadlifts, or leg press maybe, that next day, I could do high intensity work really well. Delayed onset muscle soreness had not really kicked in. I almost felt better. Like I felt like I was still warmed up because of that leg workout, and I could really get a good solid session of high intensity work. If I waited 2 days after that leg workout, now delayed onset muscle soreness is peaking. And now I'm so stiff that it's going to probably increase my risk of injury. 3rd day is kind of the same. Then you get into that 4th day past a heavy leg workout, and you have to start thinking, okay, if I do my high intensity work, is that going to make me so sore that it hurts my next leg workout? So these things have to be factored in. And I think you can even start to consider high intensity interval training very cyclically. They don't all have to be the same. So maybe one high intensity session is this kind of apparatus, and this one is this. This one is only this many sprints. This one is a little bit longer or shorter. They don't all have to be the same. And as I always tell you, this is not either or. This doesn't mean that this is the only way to do cardio. When you are super sore, let's say that you were scheduled for a high intensity session and you just don't have it, you don't, well, just do a low intensity session. You can still be active. You can still get some movement and cardio. That will probably help anyway. And even though you don't get the hormone responses that you do with high intensity interval work, it's still calories that you're using. Even if you're one of those people who just, because you'll see my programming, you who are my clients, I will say, here are how many high intensity sessions we want, or moderate sessions. And then I'll typically use phrasing like just kind of a habit or routine or baseline of low intensity work where you can get it. If it makes sense where 5 days a week you can do a 30 or 40 minute walk, that's fine. That's not exercise. That's just activity. You get into the higher intensity workloads, that's when you have to start considering recovery. So my final little admonition there, high intensity interval training is your most powerful cardio tool. It is the most important tool for even fat loss. There are other studies I could have included in here, and I've talked about these in the past, that show your activity level is the only variable that matters in effective long-term body fat loss. It's not calorie deprivation and calorie deficit. That has to be where we need it to be. But the variable that matters is your exercise output. So HIIT is that most powerful tool, but you don't always use the most powerful tool, right? Like, I don't use a jackhammer, a masonry jackhammer to hang up a drywall nail. Like, that jackhammer is the more powerful tool. Sometimes it's not the best tool for the job. So consider this one your ace up your sleeve, but you got to know how and when to play it. So thoughts and questions. I'm going to leave this up here for a second. I usually skip right past it, but for those who are new to us, just kind of checking us out, some of our websites are up there where you can get some information. Obviously, just thousands and thousands of podcasts and videos and articles written that you can get on our website, thedietdoc.com. You can always follow me on social media there, my email there at the bottom. But let me stop sharing that now and let you guys jump in here with some questions and comments.
This is a good topic. It's something that I've studied for about maybe 8 or 9 years. It didn't really get, and you're right about the popularity. So now they make and create classes such as Regimen, Orange Theory, all these group X style classes to do this HIIT. And that's something that I've researched for years now, is you can't do it every day. Right. If you go to try to do that every day, you're going to die. I mean, that's legit, full on, hard. You feel like you're going to pass out. That's when you know you hit max level. So it's definitely something that's sensitive to me. And I only do it 1 to 2 times a week.
Yeah, that's how you should do it.
Can't handle it. So great topic for sure.
Appreciate it, Chastity. And to your point, I told this story last year because it was a friend of mine, but he decided as one of these, like, okay, I'm going to get in the best shape of my life. So he goes from being quasi sedentary to deciding I'm going to do 30 days in a row of Orange Theory. Guess what happened? He tore his Achilles tendon. And then as that was healing, ended up with blood clots and almost died.
Oh my gosh.
So again, like I said, dose dependent, minimum effective dose, recovery, respect the orthopedic load that you're putting on your body. It's just no joke. And I mean, that's why it's so effective, right? The greater the risk, the greater the reward.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Amanda, are you going to jump in now?
Yeah, I'll pop in on your comment, just, what you were saying about doing something like cardio every single day. It makes me think and wonder, because I have a lot of friends that will post oh, I'm a challenge, I'm doing this whatever challenge, and every day I'm going to run 2 miles, or I'm going to do this and do all this every single day for 30 days. And I've always been kind of curious, that doesn't sound like it's very good, because you're not giving your body a chance to recover or rest. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts on that. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a HIIT style, just be a jog, or, something that's just a steady pace.
Yeah, I think I'm uniquely in a position to answer this with the least amount of bias in my life, because I'm not training for anything specifically. So I know as an off-season pro bodybuilder, it was all about gain, gain, gain. And then when I was a pre-contest bodybuilder, it's all about prep, prep, prep. Well, now, just as I started lifting weights when I was 11 years old, now at 52 years old, I just do it because I like doing it. I do it because I want to be healthy. And so I'm more willing to say, okay, here's my schedule. This is what I thought I would do today. Then I go into the gym. I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely not feeling that. I'm going to call an audible and do this instead. And what ends up happening with my normal pace of just in factoring in injuries and just age and so forth, I'm still about at 75 to 80% of lifetime peak strength. And yet I just find myself gravitating toward almost training every other day. So I'll train 3 or 4 days a week. And I just feel like the overlap allows me to train harder for those sessions, and then I need a day off. So then on those days in between weight training sessions, I tend to get my longer, more aggressive cardio sessions, which then helps me, make time for my greater weight training session. So and that's just going by feel, because I can train 7 days a week if I want. And sometimes I feel recovered enough that I'll train 5 to 6 days. But then as soon as you start pushing a little bit deeper into stimulus, you need that extra recovery. And if I was really trying to push off season or prep goals, I know I would have the tendency to just do it too much. So to your point, those people who have these challenges and so forth, and my friend who wanted to go 30 for 30 days, you're probably going to end up getting hurt at some level. I've even one quick little thing that I'll say before I let you jump back in. A lot of my friends are researchers. I mean, guys, who are powerlifting coaches, but they're also PhDs in human performance labs and exercise science departments. And some of them who have tried to push the envelope with training frequency. A couple people I know who are professors decided, I'm going to see what it's like to do maximum squatting every day for 30 days. I'm going to see if you can bench press every day for 30 days. And 2 of my friends who are PhDs have had career-ending injuries doing that. And then there are things like these, I forget what it's called, German volume training or something, where you do like 10 sets of 10 to maximum and so forth. And they'll even tell you, you can't do this for more than a couple of weeks or whatever, because you're going to destroy yourself. Oh, is the risk really worth it? I mean, how close can you get without the injury risk?
I've actually done those German volume training that with a previous coach, that it was for a competition. And yeah, when she first told me about it, I was like, wait, we're doing what? But yeah, I do definitely enjoy the HIIT style, like twice a week, like we were doing during prep. Just because I felt like not only were the benefits there, because we have talked about this before, but just that I felt like it's like, okay, done. But, let me just get it done. Let me just knock it out. And then I don't have to worry about, 60 to however many minutes every single day, versus just doing the HIIT twice a week and then maybe 30-minute walking, So for me during prep, that was really nice. And now being in kind of like I don't want to say off, but like my little break that I'm in right now, I'm excited to do spinning and jogging again.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you a chance to do some of those things. And you made me think of this. This is definitely doing it just for contest prep. This was just me doing it because it was a nice physical challenge. But there were a couple years where I would actually take clients to a track, and we worked on 100-meter sprints, 400-meter sprints, mile times. And in 1 year, I got to a 6-minute mile and a 60-second quarter mile. And I mean, just by far the best condition I've ever been in my life. And it was fun to use cardio as a metric of performance instead of just fat loss. Like, oh, I just got to do an hour cardio to lose body fat. Like, no, right. You do high intensity stuff that gets you more functional, and all of these fat loss and anti-diabetic, anti-heart disease type effects. It can actually be really fun.
I agree.
All right. Any other thoughts? Kevin, you're you should be backing me up here with correcting me on some things I might've gotten wrong or contraindications we need to think of. Dr. Brunacini.
There was a time when there was some enjoyment with cardio HIIT training. It was definitely at my end of weight loss. I don't know. It's such a tumultuous topic to me. I know it's necessary, but I just don't want to do it, as you know. But when it does involve, I wouldn't call it Olympic style necessarily. I do like I guess it's more sports training is what I'm trying to get at. But perhaps that's the same thing. What do I know? But when it involves those two, I like that as a training philosophy or paradigm, more so than just by itself. That's more, Andrea has always had that cardio bunny enjoyment, and I just don't get it. But
well, so you bring up a really good point. That is, I feel like this is a double-edged sword. Like, I don't love, like, on those days where, like, oh, I'm going to go to the track today and run a mile for time, like that. I would rather do a single rep max squat than go out there and put myself through that kind of just lung burning, just I mean, it just, your whole body hurts. But at the same time, you get that little taste of it. You start approving, you start like it, there's an enticement there where it's like, wow, that I'm really seeing the benefit. And I do feel like this is why things like Orange Theory and functional classes have really taken off. You can suffer together way better. Like, if you know you've got a class, you got friends going, you got a coach, you got peers in the group that are going to encourage you, like you get more out of it that way. So, some people know, some people it's just, you're so motivated, it's headphones on, you're going to the stadium to do this. But I think for anybody who hasn't tried it or hasn't tried it in a while, it will pull you in and you will like it. I think you will really love the benefits so much that it's worth the extra effort. You included, Kevin.
Even the squats sounds awful too, but that's where I'm at currently, is just, I'm not in either camp like I was 5 so years ago, where it was, I loved the intensity, but then I loved resistance, and now I'm just indifferent. We'll
get you back.
Nowadays, like my dad, I just got to do it.
We'll get you back. I've always maintained I respect people who do that more than I respect people who love it. Because if you're willing to do it, even though you don't love it, you're doing it for your health. It's a work ethic at that point, and you're going to enjoy the benefits anyway. So it's like telling a kid to eat your vegetables first and then you get dessert.
Good point.
Speaking of kids, Heather.
Am I the baby here?
Might be. You're like what, 17 years old?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
So the dichotomy between, utilizing the benefits of this versus the recovery piece, as we get further and further into prep, am I better off, waiting until I have to incorporate something like this, or will my body partially adapt if I start doing it now? Thoughts?
It's a little bit of a bell curve in that I like to get nutrition underway first, because then glucose disposal, lipolysis, all of that tends to smooth out the edges of things like hypoglycemia and discomfort. Then you can start getting in some lower levels of conditioning. And I think then when we've got all four wheels heading down the road on the same track, then we can start ramping that up, because then toward the end, we're going to decrease again, because now, you definitely have lower energy. We want to be more and more recovered leading into the show. So we're going to pull back a little bit. So it's almost like a nice, smooth little bell curve for prep.
That makes sense. I'd just, because you said it assists with like insulin sensitivity, right? So if I'm better at disposing of fat, potentially maybe not making the dietary changes as early or something like that. But I think what you're saying makes perfect sense. The other reason I wanted to jump in today is because I love these chats. I think hearing other people's stories is really, really helpful. And Wednesday's chat just happened to benefit me yesterday. We had some friends that we haven't been able to see in a while, and they asked us to go out to eat. And I had that like moment of, uh-oh, what's going to happen, right? But my husband and I planned out what we were going to eat. We shared a meal. And I was actually down another like pound and a half this morning. And I'm hopeful that will maintain tomorrow. So like, obviously we'll see, sodium and all of that stuff. I tried to stay really hydrated, and then we went for a walk afterward. And I feel like this was the first time I've eaten out like while losing weight without having some sort of significant craving after. Like usually I want like ice cream or something like that. And we actually walked past an ice cream place, and I was like, yeah, that doesn't even sound good. And then I didn't wake up this morning like ravenous, which is my typical. So I think that I'm seeing true physiologic changes, but I think it's helping me psychologically a lot as well. So
good.
Thank you, totally everyone that contributes.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, everybody there, everybody who comes in here regularly. Remember that these are all in the bank, so to speak, as I said earlier, on our website and YouTube channel. So if you ever want to go meander around and see what else we've covered in the last couple of years. Plenty of cool stuff.